Good evening, I'm David Kastick from Windover Information, and welcome to this, the latest in our series from the Stanford's Biodesign program from the Innovator's Workbench series. With tonight's program, we conclude our spring session, which has featured interviews with some of the leading executives in today's medical device world. Over the past 2 decades, the device industry has become a constellation of large and small companies, giant multinationals and small device startups, and few device executives embrace the entire universe of device experience, like tonight's guest, Bill Hawkins. Indeed, Bill's resume reads like a who's who of leading device companies, from his early days at Lilly, where he played a formative role in the creation of Guidant, to stints at Johnson & Johnson and American Home, to his current position as COO of Medtronic. Bill has seen and done it all, and that doesn't even begin to touch on his numerous experience with medical device startups. It's with great pleasure that we welcome Bill Hawkins tonight. Bill, welcome. Thanks very much. I know you grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and a block away from Duke, where you went to school and majored in biomedical engineering. What led you in those early days to biomedical engineering specifically, and what were your first experiences in that area?
Well, first, let me just make one clarification. You talked about my background. I want to make sure people know I never did stints at J&J. I just want to clarify that.
That's my Jersey accent. Stints.
No, you know, it's interesting. I grew up in Durham. I actually have an identical twin brother. My father was involved in politics. He was the mayor of my town, and I realized during that experience the one thing I did not want to do was to go into politics. So I ruled that out, and then I got interested for some reason in medicine, being I think around Duke, and Duke having a formidable medical center. But early on, my twin brother decided he wanted to be a vet, and I wanted to be in the field of human medicine. So that's sort of what got me early on inspired. So
your first job was at Carolina Medical Electronics. Tell us about that company and what they did.
Well, I'd be interested to know how many people know about Carolina Medical Electronics. Good to see a few people's hands in the audience. That's good. We're dating ourselves here. But Carolina was actually an interesting company. It was involved in the development of an electromagnetic blood flow meter, which was used for research to measure blood flow, but it was also used in the early days of open heart surgery to measure flow during cardiac anastomosis. But the reason I got interested, I was at Duke in the biomedical program and studied under Professor Olaf von Ram, who was working on ultrasound. And Carolina, about the time that I was graduating from Duke, had acquired the rights to the first sort of continuous wave Doppler ultrasound that was, had the potential to be used to look at diagnosing stroke in the carotid artery region. And I was, fascinated by the field of ultrasound and the fact that this little company in my sort of neighborhood in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, had acquired the rights. It looked like, an interesting opportunity for me. It was a small company, privately held, and had these two kind of interesting technologies. So I ended up going to work there in 1977 and spent almost 3.5 years before ended up leaving to go back to business school.
Now, I know that in some respects, Carolina was a bit frustrating for you. You never raised venture capital money. You thought it kind of missed some opportunities. Talk a little about that.
Well, again, it was at a point in the late 70s when ultrasound really was just kind of emerging. There was a company in Seattle, in fact, which is where a lot of the ultrasound inventions took place, but there was this little company called ATL that had developed a pulse Doppler system, and we had licensed the rights from a guy, Merrill Spencer and Jack Reed up in Seattle, who had developed continuous wave Doppler. And as I look at it at that point in time, I said, we really have pretty unique opportunity. This is sort of the early beginnings of a whole new technology front. And we were up against this company, ATL, which was getting a lot of press. They were venture-backed. They were, raising money. They were adding people. And this little company in King, North Carolina, which was privately held, we were profitable. We were only about $2 or $3 million. The owner of the company made a good living, and he purposely kind of kept the company small such that he didn't have to create any more sort of hassles for himself. And I was there for a year or so, and then they decided they wanted to create a direct sales force, and so they decided to hire a direct sales force for the U.S. market, and so they hired 4 people. and put one in the Southeast, one in the Midwest, one in the West, and one in the Northeast. And I was the one who chose the Northeast. So, talk about the School of Hard Knocks. So for almost 2 years, I traveled throughout the whole New England states, trying to directly service and sell, both electronic blood flow meters as well as this new diagnostic ultrasound equipment. But I became a little bit disenchanted after I realized that the company was just not, it wasn't in their plans to become a big company, and so that's what sort of inspired me to think about, if I was running this company, what would I do differently? And that's when I investigated business schools. Ended up going back to UVA.
Although you did say that the real motivation for leaving CME to go to business school was when they licensed their second product. Tell us about that.
I was telling David a funny story. So anyway, here we are selling electromagnetic blood flow meters, and then we had this new platform technology in ultrasound, and I was thinking that this is maybe something that we'll pursue more in the cardiology arena, until I learned that the company had just licensed their second ultrasound product, which was this large machine that was designed to evaluate prostate cancer. And it was when I was learning about this product and then realized that I was going to have to demo this, this very tortuous device, that I said, this is not what I want to be doing. So, and I won't go any further. I mean, trust me, it was not a pretty sight.
I think a lot of people in this, we've had a lot of folks from Lilly and Guidant here, and I think one of the things that's most interesting is the formative role that you played in developing Lilly's medical device business, a role that actually began while you were in business school, where you were the first summer intern that Lilly hired. Why Lilly? How did that whole thing come about?
Well, again, having worked in a small company, when I chose purposely to go to business school to learn more about how other companies become successful. And as I was there, I decided that I didn't want to go back to a small company. I wanted to go to a company that had a proven track record for leadership development and being successful in the life sciences area. And it turned out, this was in 1981, and it was in a phase when the pharmaceutical companies really had sort of expanded their vision to incorporate medical devices, and Bristol Myers Squibb had done some acquisitions in the device world. Lilly actually had really been more on the forefront and had acquired 3 companies. They had a company called IVAC, which was the first company in 1977, and a company called Physio Control, and then a company called CPI. And they came recruiting at business school with the idea of sort of acquiring talent in terms of biomedical engineers with a business background, and were interested in profiles like what I had. So I was interested in a company with a proven track record, which Lilly had. I liked the people, and so I signed on, and plus the fact that they offered me a summer internship in San Diego, and here I was in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I figured this was a good deal, and so I did. And I spent the summer in San Diego, got to work for IVAC, and then at the end of that experience, they offered me the opportunity to either go to San Diego and work for IVAC full-time after graduation, or they had just formed this business development group in Indianapolis, which was to be sort of the liaison between these 3 device companies, plus they were interested in expanding their presence in devices. And they had a very small group of people. In fact, this was even before Ron Dollins, and I know many of you know Ron. Ron wasn't even in the group. So I actually saw this as the right place for me to begin my career, and ended up deciding to work for Lilly in Indianapolis, in this what they called healthcare business planning group, which reported up through a guy named Gene Stepp.
So just because I think a lot of people here know Lilly and know some of the Lilly folks, who are some of the people that you worked with in that group?
Well, it's interesting, and if you fast forward and look today at some of the people who are in sort of influential positions in the device industry, a lot of them came out of Lilly. And if you go back to that group, it was a group of, I think there was 6 people. Jay Graff, who just retired from Guidant, who ran CPI, was one of the managers in the group. There was a guy named Andy Grinstead, who unfortunately recently passed away, but Andy was, also, had a full career in the life sciences world. There was a guy named Nelson Sims, who recently left Lilly. He was the president of Canada. And then Ron Dollins was in that group, came to that group after I was there to be the director of the business planning group. And then there were a couple of other people, a guy named Andy Reith, who is now the head of IR for Guidon. But it was a very strong group, of people that was the nucleus of this business planning group. And, again, we had the opportunity to really try to go out and look for the next new thing.
What, if anything, was shaping Lilly's device strategy at the time? Was there a strategic rationale behind the device buildup, or was it all just opportunistic?
When I came to Lilly, I said, this is interesting. A pharmaceutical company with a strong track record of success, had the vision of looking at the device world, and I thought back in 1981 they were on to something in terms of the potential of integrating devices and pharmaceuticals, and that they would be able to really maybe create a differential advantage in their markets and create new market opportunities. But it didn't turn out to be that way necessarily. And when I came into the group, they had it very segmented. The device world was very distinct from the pharmaceutical world. And so we were challenged to really go out and try to identify emerging trends in the life sciences industry, or more in the medical devices industry. And I remember we were working with the predecessor to the Wilkinson Group, which was a group called Channing and Weinberg. And they actually helped us to do sort of a broad-based sort of study of the sort of the medical device environment. And we identified in that study a number of emerging trends. And again, you gotta remember, this is a 1982, 83 kind of time frame. And one of the things that we saw as a kind of an emerging megatrend was the movement towards less invasive, therapies. And that was what kind of intrigued us about things like looking at, is there sort of a less invasive way to treat coronary artery disease, or is there a less invasive way to treat other disease states?
And that led directly to the acquisition of ACS. Talk a little about that early deal, and was it obviously a success from was the success of angioplasty, generally speaking, and ACS in particular, obvious to you all, or did it feel like an experiment or
well,
a risk?
nothing was obvious at that point, but it was clearly a very exciting area. And I remember at that point, Lilly, in their very methodical way about doing market research, what we would do is that we hired an outside agency, a public relations agency, and at this point I think it was J. Walter Thompson, and we, as the associates, we would then disguise ourselves as a public relations people, and we would go out and interview, the physicians who were doing some of the early work in angioplasty, but we wouldn't let them know that we were Eli Lilly. They thought we were just a hired public relations group. So I have these business cards of J. Walter Thompson, who I never worked for, but I went out and was doing early sort of research on the interest of this sort of less invasive therapy, and it became pretty clear to me after doing just a little bit of research that people were very excited about this emerging field of angioplasty. And at this point, C.R. Bard was kind of on their way, and we had recognized or identified a little company on the West Coast, John Simpson's company, ACS, and it was at that point it was venture backed, and so we had targeted this as a potential company to work with, but we had to generate internally to get comfortable that this was we thought going to be a good business. So we did all the research, came back and said, yes, this is where things are going to be. And I remember we ultimately went to the board and proposed doing an acquisition of ACS, and I think at that point they were doing $7 million in sales and losing $12 million. And we went to the board of Lilly and proposed an acquisition that was something like $75 million up front, and then an earn-out that could be at least that, if not more. And at that point, that was real money, but to Lilly's, to the credit of people like Gene Stepp and Vaughn Bryson and Bill Davis, names that some of you may recognize, they saw that this, was the right thing to do. So they were very supportive, And, we did the deal, and the rest is history.
Was it hard coming to valuations for those kinds of companies in those days, or were there explicit traditional formula that you were following?
Well, it wasn't, there wasn't a lot of science at that point in time, and that was one of the things that, again, was exciting. We were sort of defining the rules, that ultimately became maybe a fad in terms of how people did acquisitions. And I remember we were working with, I believe it was Morgan Stanley, and essentially we had the experience that we had with IVAC, Physio, and CPI. One of the lessons that we learned, we did outright acquisitions of those companies, in particular CPI, the pacemaker company. We acquired this company, and the founders made enough money that they got their money, they cashed out, they left, and then we found ourselves running a company we knew nothing about, and we lost a lot of ground early on. So when we were contemplating doing the ACS acquisition, one of the things that was really important was we got to find a way to keep management in the game. And I think we recognized, not that was novel, but we said that we've got to find a way to make sure that if we do the deal, that there is a real incentive to have management want to stay on and be a part of this thing going forward. So we actually, and I still have some of the early records on the formulas that we did around earnouts. And it's a little tricky when you're doing an earnout with a venture-backed firm, because a lot of people want to get their money up front and don't want to necessarily have it come later. But we structured a series of earnouts with ACS, and that ultimately I think was a win-win. It worked at Lilly, it worked for, at that point, ACS.
You noted to me once that Lilly paid about $50 million for IVAC, and that just a couple of years later, Warner Lambert paid $400 million for IMED, a direct competitor. That's an interesting difference. What led to the disparity, to your mind, or the difference between those valuations? It couldn't be that IMED was worth 8 times what IVAC was.
Well, that's an interesting, I want to talk a little about that, because in the folklore of medical device history, I think that was one of the inflection points of our industry in terms of when the spotlight really started to shine on medical devices. And that was in 1977. Lilly was not in the medical device world. They were happily doing their pharmaceutical thing, and then this company IVAC, had an unfriendly takeover offer from Colgate-Palmolive, which was viewed by the management of IVAC as this is a toothpaste company, and so they didn't want to be a part of Colgate, so they actually approached Lilly, and they approached Lilly to see if Lilly, being a drug company, would be interested in a drug delivery company. And Lilly, at that point, Jim Cornelius, who was in healthcare business planning, and some others said, yeah, this is something that we ought to seriously pursue. And again, it was a point when pharmaceutical companies were beginning to expand their vision of being beyond just pharmaceuticals, but being in life sciences. And so Lilly actually was a white knight and ended up paying $50 million for IVAC, which at that point in time in 1977 was doing $25 million in sales. So, it was a great transaction, at least for Lilly. IVAC was profitable. Lilly got in its first step into the device world. Now, the interesting thing about IVAC was founded in 1969, and it was founded by a guy named Dick Kramer. And Dick started this company with a guy named Steve Sato. And in 1972, there was a proxy fight. And Dick and Steve basically had it out, and the board favored Steve. And so Dick went across the valley and formed a company called IMED. And this is in 1973. So IVAC has a 4-year head start on IMED. And so in 1977, Lilly ends up acquiring IVAC for $50 million. 2 years later, with the specter that there's this new segment in the life sciences industry, which was, before then, there was the Baxters and there was the American Hospital Supplies, but there weren't a lot of successful sort of deals done in that era. And when IVAC was purchased by Lilly for $50 million, Dick Kramer then convinced Warner Lambert that they should be in this business and sold IMED for $477 million. And you could have, it sort of rocked, the states in terms of people woke up and said, wow, there is money to be made in these hills, in the device world. And it really set sort of a new threshold, for valuations in the life sciences industry. But
it's interesting that you make that reflection, because within a half a dozen years, the pharmaceutical companies would all begin bailing out of the medical device space. Lilly was actually one of two pharmaceutical companies whose medical device businesses you ran. Why do you think pharmaceutical companies would quickly ramp up their medical device businesses and just as quickly in the 90s begin to sell them off?
Well, again, if you go back into the era of the late 70s and you look at one of the reasons that the pharmaceutical companies sort of branched out into the device world is that was an era that the pipelines of the pharmaceutical businesses were, at a low ebb. And so in some respects, some of the leadership of the pharma world saw the device industry as a way to, again, broaden their business opportunities and to be able to ride the growth that was starting to happen in the device world. So that's what compelled a lot of pharmaceutical companies to look at the device sector. Plus, they said this may be the combination of devices and drugs could potentially work. But the reality is, as I said earlier, when Lilly never really tried to figure out how to integrate drugs and devices, they managed these businesses as distinct businesses. In fact, for all intents and purposes, Lilly was a banker. And we had a series of medical device companies, but there really wasn't a lot of integrated management. And I would say the same thing, for J&J to a degree. J&J, had three, large business segments. They had the pharma world, they had the consumer products world, and they had the medical device world. And having been a part of that organization for a time, I can tell you as well that they were silos, and they didn't have the systems that were able to leverage technologies across these businesses. Now, J&J has pursued a different strategy. They want to be a more diversified, large-scale company, and so they've been able to stay, sort of in this industry. But some of the pharma companies who got in thinking that this was, a chance for them to have a bigger market to grow their business, and then when they saw in the late 70s when their pipelines were at a low ebb, they got into the business. But then if you will, you go into the late 80s when their pharmaceutical pipelines started to fill back up. They said, we're not running these things as integrated businesses. It's a distraction. Let's focus, stick to the knitting. And that's when they decided to shed their device businesses.
It's interesting that you phrase it that way, because some people look at the recent J&J deal for Guidant as a kind of vote of confidence in devices and a vote of no confidence for pharma. That is to say that if J&J senior executives really believed that there was a lot of potential in pharma, they'd have invested the $25 billion in pharma. Do you think the climate has changed at all in terms of the device and pharma fortunes? Are we back at a period where we can expect to see big pharma reinvest in devices precisely because their pipelines are dry?
I think people are looking at it a little bit differently now. I think that people are maybe a little bit, broader thinking and a little bit more visionary, but I think that there is, a perspective that is, we need to think about not just ourselves as product companies or technology companies, but we're really in managing certain disease states. And ultimately, the best solutions are going to be the integration of devices and pharmaceuticals. And I think the drug eluting stent is a perfect example. And it has, really, I think, demonstrated the value of having an integrated system. So there are some companies that are, pharmaceutical companies and device companies are looking at each other and saying, the lines are blurring. We need to find ways of, integrating pharmaceuticals into the device world, and pharmaceutical companies like the Novo Nordisk, who are in insulin and are needing delivery systems, are looking at, devices as a way to, either, and they don't have to necessarily own them, but to have certain relationships or strategic alliances or partnerships that enable them to bring a complete solution to, the patient or to the caregiver.
You spent 14 years at first Lilly and then Guidant in a variety of posts. You ran a number of companies. You became president of U.S. operations. Talk a bit about how your career at Lilly evolved. And beyond specific jobs and appointments, talk about what Lilly has meant to you in terms of shaping your management style and perspective and influencing the direction of your career.
Right. Well, I've told people often that I wouldn't be in the job that I am today if it hadn't been for Lilly, and that was the best decision I made coming out of business school, was to go to work for a company that had a track record for leadership development, a company that had also a track record for being successful in what they were doing. But I was fortunate. I joined Lilly at a point when they had a pretty established system for how to get people that they thought had potential, the right experiences to be able to develop general managers. And they consciously did things with me, moving me from line to staff. I started in a corporate development role, then I went into a marketing management role. Then they wanted to really move me more into sort of a first phase general management, but also get me some international experience. So they moved me to Europe to really set up if we will, the structure for their MDD organization in Europe. And then they realized that I needed to get certain operations experience, so they moved me after 4 years from being in Europe, to kind of a chief operating officer role running physio control. And then they ended up giving me the opportunity to run IVAC in 1991. They sent me to San Diego. So, I feel very fortunate, that I had those opportunities, and I truly believe there was a conscious, process for getting, people that they deemed had sort of, certain leadership skills, the right experiences to be able to marry with the leadership skills to be able to ultimately run their businesses. And, and I was one, and there were other people, the Jay Graffs of the world and the Ron Dollins of the world, also were sort of in that same, caliber in terms of experiences. So I again feel very fortunate to have had the 14 years that I did at Lilly, and the decision to leave after we did the spinoff of Guidant was a very difficult one for me, but it was as much a personal decision to ultimately, and people in California might not like to hear this, but I was growing up on the East Coast. I wanted to get closer to my roots on the East Coast, so that was as much a decision for me, was to move back east as it was to leave Lilly. I wasn't leaving Lilly. I was really more on a personal decision to get closer to my family.
Before we take that topic, I believe Lilly has trained not only great managers internally, but if you go to the device community here in the Bay Area and Southern California, it's trained a lot of executives who work somewhere else. To your mind, was there a philosophy or a style or a set of principles that were inculcated at Lilly that led so many executives to be Lilly to head other companies? What kind of influence did Lilly have on the device CEO community?
Well, again, and I think in today's world, it's particularly relevant to talk about values, but Lilly had a set of values that I think distinguished it from other companies, and those values were: 1, a respect for the individual; 2 was trust; and 3 was, a commitment to excellence. And I think the second one, trust, was one that meant more to me. I mean, I didn't really appreciate the value of trust, and you don't really recognize it until you're with a company for a number of years, and you really don't really appreciate it until you leave, and then you realize what you had. But I think there was a certain, and I think still today, I mean, there's a certain value system about Lilly. There's a certain just respect about Lilly. I mean, they went through some tough times. I was there in '82. In fact, I joined in '82 when they had the issue with binoxapropin. People remember the whole issue with Tylenol, but Lilly had a similar situation when we launched what was going to be the sort of a blockbuster, and it was a blockbuster drug, and an anti-inflammatory drug or a rheumatoid arthritis drug called binoxapropin. And I never will forget, I joined Lilly in August of '82, and they had just, like weeks before, launched this product, and there was a buzz within Eli Lilly that this drug, was on track to do $1 million a day, which was unheard of in the pharmaceutical business back in 1980, in that time frame. And within weeks of being there, unfortunately there was reports of patients who were on this drug having sort of unintended consequences, and they ultimately made the decision that they needed to pull the drug. And I think to this day, I think they handled it the right way. But again, there was a certain set of values that Lilly had in terms of respect for the individual, this trust, and this whole thirst for excellence that I think has, made it a company that people, felt, good about the company and felt good about the people.
You mentioned that in 1995 you wanted to come back to the East Coast and you joined Johnson & Johnson. We tend to think, as we talk to particularly successful executives, that their career trajectories are one step up after another. But I know that J&J was a difficult time for you. You once described it to me as a great career move, but one that just didn't work out. Talk to us about your J&J experience and tell us a story about your first day at work at Ethicon Endosurgery.
I was telling David earlier, I should have known that I was maybe in for a rough ride when I was I had made the decision to take this job to be the president of Ethicon Endosurgery, which at that point, and again, this is in 1995, Ethicon Endo, the whole field of laparoscopic surgery was really, there was a buzz. This was when US Surgical and J&J were in this classic marketing war, and it was one of the great marketing battles of all time in medical devices. And the opportunity for me to come in to be the president of this very competitive business, and I love to compete, so this was to me, it really was an exciting chance. And I was telling David I was recruited by actually Bob Croce. Bob Croce at that point was the group company chairman of Ethicon Endosurgery, and there was a guy named Bill Weldon who was the president of Ethicon Endosurgery. And Bob sort of for 6 months was trying to convince me that I should come, and they were going to take Bill and put him back into the pharmaceutical business, and I would report to Bob. And so again, it was the hardest decision I've ever had to make, was to leave Guidon or to leave Lilly after 14 years. But as I said, for personal reasons, and plus, Ron, Guidon, when we were spun off, Ron was, in his 40s, and he was clearly going to be in this job for many years. And I love working for Ron, but I felt if I was going to do something on my own, this was kind of the time of my career. And plus, the chance to get close to the East Coast. So I agonized. I ultimately decided to do the job, and I was going to go to work for Bob Croce. And as I am literally sort of packing up, I get a call from Bob Croce to tell me that Bob says, "Bill, I got some sort of good news, bad news." I said, "Well, what's the news?" He says, "I have actually been asked myself to move over and not to move from Ethicon Endosurgery and to become the president of the JJIS, the new stent company that we have within J&J. And what we're going to do is we're going to take Bill Weldon, who you were going to replace, and we're going to make Bill the group company chairman." And so I said, "Well, that's kind of interesting." I said, what does Bill think about this, Bill Weldon? Because I wasn't being recruited by Bill, I was being recruited to replace Bill. And he said, "Well, Bill's okay with this." I said, "Well, that's reassuring. Are you sure he's okay with this?" And anyway, so they convinced me that things were going to be okay. So I ultimately made the decision. I made the decision to go ahead of my family about a month because my kids were still in school. And I ended up leaving. I think it was the end of November. I was going to start the first week in December. And I moved from San Francisco to Cincinnati in December, which is not the time of year to move to Cincinnati. And I remember they had organized this little apartment for me, so I came in on a Sunday night, and I was going to start first thing Monday morning. And I get to this apartment, and I'm just like the whole reality of this whole big change. So the next morning, I set my alarm clock for 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to be the first person at work. I'm going to be ready to go. So I'm in this apartment. I have my little rental car out in the parking lot. And I haven't lived in the cold weather in a long time, so I woke up and it was like cold and it was snowy. So I said, I gotta go out and start my car. So I go out, I never have done this before. I go outside and I go in and I start the car and I get out of the car and I close the door and the car door locks. And I realize my keys to my apartment and the car, and my apartment's now locked. The car is now locked. It is, Monday morning at 5:30. I know nobody. And I'm standing out there, in my pajamas. And I'm thinking, this is not meant to be. And so, what do you do? I had no cell phone. So, and the idea of going and knocking on doors and sort of, hey, I'm the new neighbor in my pajamas at 5:30 in the morning, which is what I ended up doing. And so I should have known that things were, maybe this was not the right move for me. But anyway, I did. I got to work a little bit late, but I was there. And but I was telling David, it was one of the most challenging experiences. Again, after having been with the company for 14 years, and there's a lot of things that you sort of take for granted. I had, built a lot of trust, a lot of respect within the organization. Now I come to a new company, and nobody knew me. I was recruited, but they didn't really know me, and I ended up in a situation where I'm working for someone who I was supposed to replace. And it was, those dynamics are sometimes hit or miss, and in my case it was a tough situation. And I was there for a couple of years, and then ultimately realized that this was probably not the best place for me to be, and was recruited then to work for American Home Products, who at that point was looking to find someone to run their whole medical device portfolio. And this was an interesting point in my career, because American Home had sort of seen what Guidant or Lilly had done, and confided in me that they were interested in potentially spinning off their medical device group. So I was attractive to them for a number of reasons. And so I ultimately, left J&J to go to work for American Home Products. This is in 1997, to run their medical device portfolio, which at that point was 4 companies: a company called Quinton, a company called Storrs, which was ophthalmic surgery instrumentation. Then there was a specialty pharmaceutical company, and then there was the large company was Sherwood Davis and Geck, which is not a law firm. It is a diversified medical products company. So I went in 1997 to run the American Home Products division.
And interesting enough, the man you replaced, last name was
Lilly. David Lilly.
There you go.
Remember well.
So, but they did spin off. What happened at American Home Products?
Well, that was, again, this is what I love about this industry. There's nothing more constant than change. So here I make a decision to move my family once again. And by the way, we're moving further east, so that was a good thing. Going from Cincinnati now to New Jersey. American Home Products had their headquarters in a wonderful place in New Jersey, Madison, New Jersey, in a place called Girarda Farms. And I was recruited, to run this division. And the chairman, Jack Stafford, had sort of, again, confided in me that, Bill, we don't know whether we want to be in the device world, so we want you to come in, try to figure out if there's something here we should invest in, or if there's something or whether we should maybe divest. And it's not clear who would want to buy these companies. And if you knew Sherwood Davis and Geck, it's a hodgepodge of medical products. And so they said, one of the things that we think we may want to do is to do what you did at Guidant and do a spin out. And we've got a low tax basis. It would make sense for us to do some type of spin out. So they said, come in and let's try to figure out if this is the right thing. So I come in 6 months after I'm there. I had hired Bain to help me sort of do a big strategy review, and we were just about ready to make a recommendation to, sort of restructuring this device group, selling one of the businesses, but keeping and investing in one of the other businesses. And I remember coming into work on a Monday morning, and Jack Stafford, who never calls a staff meeting, called a staff meeting for all of us to come to the boardroom. We go to the boardroom, and he announces that they had, over the weekend, made the decision to pull Fen-Phen. And if you know anything about the diet pill, and if you know what they've ended up paying today, but even then, back in 1998, we knew this was going to be a long haul. And we thought it was going to be probably at least $2 or $3 billion, of liability. So they made the decision then that let's go ahead and sell the medical device group and generate some cash, be able to, have some reserves to and be focused on pharmaceuticals, and we'll have to deal with this whole fin. Well, first of all, 6 years later, I think the bill is close to $21 billion on fin. So the $2 billion that we sold the device group for didn't quite, pay for all of what they needed to pay for. But the other interesting thing was, so here I was then told, after 6 months after being there, the bill, we want to just go ahead and either find a strategic, buyer or to find a financial buyer. And I was pretty excited because it wasn't clear that there was any strategic buyers that would be interested in buying a Sherwood Davis and Geck. We knew that we were in the process of selling stores to Bausch and Lomb, so that deal was kind of already in the works. Quentin was a different story, but the big one was Sherwood Davis and Geck. And so we hired an investment banker to see if there would be a strategic buyer out there or a financial buyer. And we had both, and so we did all the books, got everything ready to go, and then out of the blue surfaced Tyco. And I remember I got a call from Dennis Kozlowski who said, look, we want to buy Sherwood Davis and Geck. They had Kindle, they were on a rampage of buying medical device companies and really sort of integrating them and then dropping a lot to the bottom line and then buying the next one. And they came in with a cash offer that was way over what we thought we could have gotten in any financial buyer transaction. And so we ultimately sold the device business 5 months later. So I was at American Home all of 11 months to Tyco.
Yeah.
So.
Did you ever get invited to that party out in Mallorca?
I won't go there. No, I wouldn't go there.
Your next stop was Novos, the brachytherapy pioneer. And I know you must have mixed feelings. A lot of people remember Novos as the company that didn't survive the onslaught of drug-eluting stents. But on the other hand, Novos, under your leadership, had the fastest ramp-up of any device company up to that time, with $30 million in sales in its first year. And I think you took it to $70 million in the first 4 years. Talk about your Novos experience and how that fit into your career at that point.
Well, so up until, other than my first job, which was, for a small company, for the next, 18 years, I was with large companies. And I was always interested in doing a startup, and I was fortunate coming out of American Home that I was in a position where I could take some risk. And, I got approached by some people that I knew who had started this company called Novos to come down to Atlanta, which is kind of a part of the world that I wanted to go to take over this little startup, which actually they had just taken public, because this was in 1996 when the IPO market opened up, and I think it's closed ever since. But they had taken this company public, but it was only 30 people. They had raised money to begin this journey of trying to cure restenosis with radiation. And I remember a couple people on the board approached me and said, look, you ought to look at this. So I did, and I decided that, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to try my hands at a startup. So I went down there in 1998. There was 30 people, and they had raised, we had about $15 million in the bank. And I spent 3.5 years, building this little company, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. It was one of the experiences I had probably the biggest highs and the biggest lows. I mean, I never will forget when, after 2.5 years of working to ultimately demonstrate that this therapy of using radiation could actually work, and we were at the American College of Cardiology in March of 2000, and we unblinded our pivotal study which was called the START, which was used looking at radiation for instant restenosis, and we had met all of our endpoints, and the stock went up to, like $50 a share. We had a market cap over $1 billion. And it was, you just can't imagine, the rush of having taken a risk like I did, and 2.5 years later to see this thing all happen. And then that was in March of 2000. And then the lowest moment of my life was 6 months later, in August of that same year, when I was at the European Society of Cardiology in Barcelona. And I happened to go to a little presentation, by the guys in Brazil.
Edward Souza.
Souza, Professor Souza, Dr. Souza, who presented the results of 30 patients using the sirolimus drug on a drug-eluting stent, and he showed that in 4 months they were able to prevent restenosis, and it just completely changed my life, and it changed the Wall Street's view of our stock. I think our stock took a hit that day of over 50%. We went from a market cap of $1 billion in one day to a market cap of less than $500 million. And then, 2 months later, I'm back up again when we got FDA approval to actually start to sell our brachytherapy system. We got approval the same day that J&J did. And as you know, there was no love lost with J&J with me, so I was ready for the battle. It was beta against gamma. And so in November of 2000, we got FDA approval the same day that they did. We actually got our announcement out about an hour before they did, so we were technically the first to get approval. And as David said, the first year, we went to battle. Wall Street pegged that we could do maybe $35 million in our first year. They said that J&J would probably do 50, we would do 35. And at the end of 2001, our first year in the market, we had actually done $70 million in the first year, and J&J, I think, ended up less than $20 million. So again, one of the moments that I was most proud of, but they got the last laugh because that was the same time and then 2001 is when they presented the results of Ravel, which was the next biggest downer in my life when I was in Stockholm, and I saw 0% restenosis, and it became pretty clear that this is going to be a short-lived therapy. So anyway, but it was a fabulous experience. I mean, the excitement, was just terrific.
You went from Novos to Medtronic. How did you make that leap? There were rumors that you actually were recruited while you were negotiating with Medtronic to sell Novos to them. Any truth to those rumors?
No, I mean, the one thing I love about this industry, I mean, I look around the room and there are a lot of friends in the audience. I mean, it's a fairly tight-knit group of people, and you get to know people. And I, over the years, had built a good relationship up with the people at Medtronic. I mean, I look at sort of this industry as a sport. And people often ask me how I, can be kind of good friends with Ron Dollins, who is the chairman of Guide and Yum at Medtronic. And the way I answer that, I said, it's like being, in the NBA. When I'm on the court, there's nobody who's more competitive than me. But when I'm off the court, I am, they're some of my best friends. And I've made it a point in my career to get to know who the players are in this business. And over the years, I had built a good relationship up with Bill George. I knew Art Collins very well. I knew Jack Schuler. Jack Schuler is the lead director at Medtronic. Jack was probably the guy that was instrumental in getting me to Medtronic. And I had built up a good relationship with Jack and Art and Bill. And they had actually, before I went to Novos, when I was leaving American Home Products, Art and Bill called me and said, Bill, you're leaving American Home, why don't you come to work, for Medtronic? We want you to do this or do that. And at that point, I said, Art and Bill, I'm flattered. I appreciate, the fact that you're interested in having me come to Medtronic, but I really want to do this startup. And so I ended up turning down the job at Medtronic, and I went to work for Novos. But to Art's credit, every year, during their organizational planning review, Art would call me. For 3 years or 4 years straight, he called me once a year and said, Bill, you've done the Novos thing. Are you ready to come to Medtronic? And I have to give him credit, being very persistent. And, once we had the company up and running, it was profitable. It was pretty clear to me that Novos, was going to have to go through another transition. And so the question is whether I wanted to do that versus the opportunity to really come in and have a larger platform to work with, which is what Medtronic had, and the chance to participate in this industry at again at a very high, at another level, and to be able to impact patients all over the world with with a company like Medtronic was important to me. So,
now, Medtronic is a great company, but you hardly stepped into an easy assignment. Your first job there was running their interventional cardiology business. Talk about that, because when you got to their vascular business, it was stumbling a bit. It was having difficulties.
Stumbling. That's an understatement. I mean, yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to Art in the end of 2001 after they had just lost this court battle with Guidant and Boston Scientific and were compelled to take their stent product off the market, or at least the rapid exchange. They lost the patents around rapid exchange, so they had to literally take half their products off the market. Plus the fact that it was, as I got to know a little bit about the company, it was pretty clear that they really were nowhere with drug-eluting stents. And so, it was pretty clear that this company was not well positioned for success. But I have to tell you something, for those people who are, at different points in their career, I mean, in many respects, that's the kind of time when you want to come into a company. I mean, one thing when I was interviewing with Art and Bill, and I actually interviewed with a number of people on the board, the thing that I wanted to be sure about was I wanted to make sure that the expectations were right within the board and the management about where they saw the vascular business. And it was pretty clear they knew they were in for a tough time. And it wasn't clear, how they were going to get out of that. And in some respects, that's the best time to join, okay? Because there wasn't the expectations we were going to continue to grow this business at 25%. It was just, how are we going to turn this thing around? So that, in many respects, sort of intrigued me. I felt confident that the board and the leadership of Medtronic, were at least, fairly realistic that there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not, what was going to happen with this vascular business. On the other hand, I was convinced that they were 150% committed to this business. I knew that, this was not a question of whether, well, let's just see if we can turn it around. If we can't, we'll get rid of it. They had committed that they need to be in this business. So when I knew that they were committed to the business, and I knew that their expectations were that this was going to be, it was going to be a long sort of turnaround, then I felt like I had at least the runway to come in and to be able to make some of the changes. They were willing to back me, invest in the company, and they've done that. Mm-hmm. And fast forward, I'm very proud about where we are with the vascular business. I came in, and 6 months after I'm there, I negotiated a deal with Abbott, which got us access to both a drug and a polymer. We ultimately actually developed a unique catheter system that's a single operator exchange system that is not rapid exchange, but it's kind of what we call a multiple exchange catheter, but it allows you a single operator to do it. So we had a new catheter system. We had, and then 6 months after I'm there, we have a drug and a polymer. Now we don't know whether it's going to work. And then, we also knew that, we were going to have to be creative on our clinical trials because, when we did the Gantt chart, it was pretty clear that by the time we started our clinicals in the U.S., J&J could be approved, and there was no way in the world we were going to be able to do a superiority trial in the U.S. with a drug-eluting stent here in the U.S. So that's what compelled us to work with the FDA and to try to create a novel clinical trial strategy to be able to go outside the U.S. and do our major pivotal trial in Europe, which is what we did.
I'll ask one question about that, and then one other about Medtronic. Was there much internal debate about doing a deal with a competitor? It certainly seemed like an unusual move at the time, doing a deal with Abbott as opposed to sourcing from a small biotech company. Was there any concern that Abbott itself was trying to build its interventional cardiology franchise at that time?
Well, we knew that Abbott was interested in doing that, and we had something that Abbott wanted. They needed access to some of the IP that we had around catheters and stents, and they had something we needed. They had, the intellectual property. They had the drug, and they had the polymer. And it was interesting. We had alternatives. I had, in a short period of time, had negotiated access to another drug, which would have been a very effective drug. But what distinguished Abbott was the fact that they had both the polymer and the drug. And when I came to Medtronic, the end of 2001 or 2002, we didn't have a drug or a polymer. And I mean, that was probably the smartest thing that I did, or we did, was to go with a company that had both the polymer and the drug, because as we've learned in hindsight, it's not just about the drug, it's as much about the polymer as it is about the drug.
Recently, you stepped up from running the vascular business to become Medtronic's CEO.
COO.
COO, excuse me. Freudian slip there, sorry. How have your responsibilities changed, and what does the COO do that you didn't do in your previous responsibilities?
Well, it's an interesting role, and someone needs to write a book about what does a COO do. I've defined it in some respects. In my job is in some way to make the whole of Medtronic greater than the sum of the parts. We have a bunch of businesses, and by the way, we're in great businesses, and that's the fun part of my job. I'm now at a point in my career where I can kind of bring all the companies that I've worked with in the past, the drug infusion with IVAC, which is now MiniMed, the laparoscopic surgery, which is a little bit equatable to the whole spine world. Early days, I worked in the CRM business with CRM, the vascular work. So a lot of what we do at Medtronic, I've worked with in my past. So it's been so fun to be able now to have a chance to work, in all these different businesses. The one area I hadn't spent a lot of time in, which is an area I've become fascinated by, is in the whole neurostimulation area, where we have a significant franchise. And so I've spent a fair amount of time this year, working with those businesses in the movement disorders and the neurostim world, and there's a lot we have going on in that area to really expand and grow that business. But my job is different now. It is as much about trying to figure out how we allocate resources across the different businesses. It's trying to find ways of leveraging things across the businesses to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. A lot of what I do, probably the most of what I do though, is the big lever that I have is the judgment of trying to make sure I get the right people in the right jobs. And again, at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's about having the right people with the right set of skills in the right roles that can ultimately enable our business to be successful. Because there's no way Art can run all these businesses. There's no way I can run all these businesses. We have to have a team of people that are in different jobs that are the right people for those jobs. So I spend an inordinate amount of time really trying to ensure that we have, that I'm working with Art on strategy, and that we have the right structure, and then we have the right skills, and then we have the right systems. It's the old McKinsey 7S framework, and it's very real in what I do. I have to link strategy, structure, skills, systems, social styles, and so forth.
The 50 minutes has just sped by. Let me ask you one final question. Over the last 7 years, Medtronic has evolved into such an interesting company, far beyond its roots in cardiac rhythm management. And your own experience, as we've seen, has embraced such a wide range of areas and opportunities in medical devices. Where do you think the medical device industry is going? What are the limits of this industry? Where are we breaking down what have been traditional limits, particularly in an era of drug-device convergence?
Well, I think that in 10 years' time, we may not be talking about medical devices. I think medical devices, was an appropriate characterization for where we were 10 years ago and maybe a little bit today. But more and more, I think we are taking a broader view of how do we, bring appropriate solutions to different diseases. If you look at, what we're doing today, we're in diabetes, we're in heart failure, we're in movement disorders, we're in the whole field of revascularization. So I think that with that broader sort of view of disease states, it then enables us to look at what sort of combination of technologies can we put together that ultimately has the best outcome. And again, whether it's in heart failure, and when I look at heart failure, we have multiple tools that are being applied to address heart failure, whether it's cardiac resynchronization therapy, whether it's pioneering work we're doing in cell replacement therapy, whether it's some of the things that we're doing in the vascular area with sort of minimally invasive valve repair. All these are tools that we think will ultimately be configured to provide the best solutions to those physicians who are managing heart failure. So I think the future is, and again, this was a fad many years ago when people were talking about disease state management more from a managed care perspective. But I think that is really, where the companies like Medtronic are headed. I mean, we want to be the leader in diseases like heart failure, diseases like diabetes. And when you think that way, you can then, there's a lot of opportunities inside, that sort of umbrella that enables us to do multiple things, which brings in the convergence of devices and biologics. And in addition, I think the other important topic is on information management. How do we then integrate information on these diseases that allow us to sort of in an iterative way better control the ultimate outcomes? Great.
Well, wherever it goes, I know, Bill, that you and Medtronic will be there. Thank you very much for being here today.